And to start us off, Wayne Staats, our lead bracket reporter at NCAA.com and TNT Sports. Staats has been giving us the inside scoop on data coming in on this year's bracket. So we're going to go to Wayne first. Staats, tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about the data that we have coming in.
Yeah, so we got some fun stuff. So we saw the first kind of batch coming through yesterday, and there's been some changes, which is kind of cool, seeing in real time the things that have changed. If we take a look here, let's start with, I think the big one is what people are picking to win. So again, this is by percentage. So this is bracket challenge game players in our men's game, the percentages that they're picked to win the championship. So you can see UConn is the champion on 25.53% of brackets. Pretty good number. You can see a gap over them between Houston and UNC are the second and third one. Not the highest we've seen on record. We've seen Kentucky when they were undefeated in 2015 was above 46%. But again, that was a pretty rare situation there when they're undefeated. And Duke, of course, was in the 30s as well. But UConn at 25.53% is clearly the favorite. But this sounds like we're talking margins here, so it's not a dramatic shift, but there was a flip. Houston jumped UNC to be the second most popular champ pick. Again, you can see here the very small margins here,
Yeah.
but still kind of interesting to see. Houston kind of jumping UNC a little bit. Houston is a little higher a seed on the seed line with the 1 seed, but again, this is very, very small differences here in terms of that, but still interesting to see when there's a change that high up there on the champ pick side. Again, we saw this yesterday with Kentucky. They're again very popular, the most picked team that's not a 1 seed. So they're the champion on 6.46% of men's bracket challenge game brackets, head of all twos, which is kind of interesting. Speaking of this twos, see Marquette here is trailing some threes and fours there. So they're champion on 2.06% of brackets. But again, the number, if that sounds familiar to some of you, you'll know that UConn was a champion last year on just over 2% of brackets. So Marquette, don't worry, it's going to be fine. That doesn't mean you can't win, but they are the least picked two of our brackets challenge game players right now on the men's side. And you got to talk about McNeese. So they dropped a little bit from yesterday, but still about 1% have McNeese winning it all as a 12 seed, which is kind of interesting. So that's been the change on in terms of percentages of who's going to win or what people are picking to win. So quarter of our brackets are picking UConn, but you can see there's some changes elsewhere down the line. You can see some more champ picks. Then we'll keep track of all these until brackets lock on Thursday. Michelle, do you want to look at some upset picks?
Yeah, I do. But first, before we get to the upset picks,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
any of this super surprising to you? UConn being the favorite, picking them to repeat when they have a pretty tough road to the championship. Or how about like Kentucky above a few other
Yeah.
2 seeds? Any of this surprising?
Not really. So I think maybe at first glance, when I saw these numbers coming in, I'm like, oh wow, Kentucky's has a higher pick percentage of brackets picking them than the 2 seeds. But remember, Kentucky's Kentucky. They're a very, very,
Yeah,
very popular fan base. People recognize them. That's an easy default pick. And also it's kind of a cool pick if you don't want to pick all 1s and 2s, you can't go wrong with
right.
picking a Kentucky that's a 3. That's a kind of cool pick there. So I think that's kind of interesting to note there. And then for UConn, I was wondering if this will go a little higher. We see not that, rising by over half of a percentage point. That's not insignificant, when you're talking about some margin like this. So I'm
Right.
curious if that continue to rise a little bit here. We'll see if Houston and North Carolina, if they kind of stay neck and neck here, or if they kind of make a run closer to UConn. And then Purdue, you can see Purdue has dropped a little bit as well. Maybe people are scared off again as they start thinking about their brackets, but we'll see. But yeah, so I would say nothing too surprising the more you think about it, because it's one thing to look at the numbers and kind of just take them at face value, but really think about why people are picking the way they are. Maybe the most surprising still is McNeese at 1%. That's kind of
Yeah.
shocking to see, but people are sticking with them so far, which is kind of cool. People are not backing down yet, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's really cool. All right, let's take a look at those first round upset picks. These are always so much fun.
Yeah, so this is okay. So this different tab here. So what this is telling us is, for example, UConn in our bracket challenge game, 97.64% of our brackets have UConn beating Stetson. So that means that,
Okay.
out of 100%. So that's what the percentages mean for everybody. But you see, UNC is actually getting picked higher to advance the second round of more brackets than UConn is by percentage. But again, very small margin. Um, But you can see here, I think this is maybe the coolest thing we've seen so far, at least this year, is the three closest pick games in terms of like, 50-50 or whatever are 6-11 games, three of them. You think it'd be an 8-9 or
Yeah.
maybe even a 7-10, but 6-11 games are the closest in terms of like the split here. So you can see this one in particular, South Carolina, Oregon, that's the closest game right now. So you can see it's not 50-50 or close, that close to 50-50, but it's our closest one we have right now, which is kind of weird considering 6-11 by definition by the tournament, a seed line difference, that's an upset. So the three closest games right now are the upset games, are the closest picks for upset, because I think it's kind of cool. And you can see, of course, Oregon, NC State, New Mexico, what they have in common, they all won their conference tournaments. So I think people
Yeah.
are catching on that bandwagon a little bit, which is kind of cool. And you can
Which
see,
makes sense.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, ride the hot hand, right? And
Yeah, I mean, I'll
the
probably do the
Oregon,
same thing.
yeah, I think I will be too. But actually, the Oregon one's really interesting because they're our fourth highest upset pick ever. The only
Oh,
teams that have been higher than them have all gone above 50%. So, that's really crazy. So that was 20. These are all 11 seeds too. 2016 Gonzaga, 2022 Michigan, and 2022 Virginia Tech were all picked above 50%. Two of them won. So there's good history here of being the most popular upset pick when you're this high on the list. Not that NC State's far behind either. So maybe they can catch Oregon tomorrow because they were ahead of Oregon yesterday. So it's kind of interesting how that kind of flipped today. Other down seed
yeah.
lines, you can see James Madison is again the top 12. Nothing too surprising there. McNeese is only the third pick 12 to win the first round by percent by brackets. But people who pick them early are sticking with them late, which is kind of cool. So there's some loyalty there. Stanford is again the top 13, not historically high, but still it doesn't be not that bad to be the top pick team for your year. We can see here we have the first four. So that's something we'll notice tomorrow once tonight's games end. We can see more about BB people picking specific teams that win today going forward. So that could be something that's worth watching. And let's go even further down. You see here, Morehead State's the top 14 seed. But the cool thing on the 15 seed line is we talked about St. Peter's yesterday when, of course, they
Yes.
made the leading run 2 years ago as a 15 seed. They're back as a 15 this year. They're only the second highest 15 today. They were the highest yesterday.
Huh.
Now Western Kentucky jumped them, which is interesting. However, the two of them together are still the most picked 15s we've ever seen since 2014 when we started tracking these brackets by percent. So you can see almost 8% and above 8% of BCG brackets have Western Kentucky and St. Peter's winning. Not saying combined, just separately they're getting picked at those rates, which is kind of cool. And then
So
Longwood is our most
stats
picked. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
on that one, before we move on to
Yeah.
Longwood, St. Peter's, I get it. Everybody's remembering the big run from a few years ago, and they're like, oh, let's go and pick them again. What do you think about Western Kentucky being the top 15 ever to be picked in the first round?
Yeah, so I think it's to do with the Marquette thing. So I said earlier, Marquette was the least popular two seed. Not saying they're not popular, just they're least popular of the two seeds. So I think that's part of it. Just as people maybe are, Marquette's not always 100% healthy lately. I mean, that's part of it as well. Western Kentucky, not surprising. Kentucky school has a very large fan base, so that's probably Hilltopper fans filling in brackets, which is kind of cool. And you know what? They're on the same bracket as Kentucky, so maybe the people are some hoping for Western Kentucky showdown later in the tournament.
Yeah,
And Kentucky's the three in the same regional as Western Kentucky's the 15. So maybe that's part of it as well. But again, not saying that St. Peter's is very far behind. You can see they're pretty close to each other. So who knows? Come tomorrow, this could
right.
very well change again. But it's still kind of cool to
For
see
sure.
in real time the teams that are flipping for the most picked. And see, St. Peter's is not like they're not losing a lot of support. It's just that Western Kentucky is getting more and more popular.
Yeah, and you can head down that line more, talk about Long Beach State. And then also, we talked about McNeese a little bit. Let's talk Cinderellas and teams that look like could be America's March Madness sweetheart this year.
Yeah, yeah. So this is for Sweet 16. So again, this is 91.81% of brackets in BCG have UConn in the Sweet 16. Very, very
Okay.
high. You can see right here, the top double digit is New Mexico, which is, 18, almost 19% have an 11 seed in the Sweet 16. That's that's pretty high. So of course, New Mexico is playing Clemson in the first round. That's one of those 6-11 games that are hard for a lot of people to pick with a big upset potential there. And then if New Mexico does get out of that game, they would play the winner of Baylor Colgate. So that's kind of their path to the Sweet 16 that people seem to be attaching themselves to. And of course, James Madison, we saw them earlier, is another popular one. And again, the things with 11 and 12s is what helps them out is you see what's why they're higher than 8s and 9s you can see here is because even though 8 is
Yeah.
obviously higher than 11, 8s have to play in theory a 1 seed in the second round, unless of course
Right.
FDU steps in. So that's why you can see teams like 11 and 12 getting more percentages or higher percentages in complete brackets than 8s and 9s because they avoid the 1 seeds. So that kind of explains why sometimes the seeds seem a little weird in terms of why the 11 so high and the 9 or 8 and 9 so low. That's the reason why. Particularly here at the Final Four, you can see this is a kind of a preview. We are kind of hearing what we saw earlier with the champ pick. McNeese is the top double-digit seed, picked the Final Four. So 3.41% of men's bracket challenging brackets have McNeese in the Final Four this year. Again, that's not a large number out of 100% picking them, but for a 12 seed, that's pretty high. And you can see here, UConn, not surprising, is in the Final Four on well more than half of our brackets so far. I mean, you can see the gap here. That's where the separation comes. You see, these are pretty close, making the Sweet 16. You can see here, but it's making that jump to the Final Four where UConn really separates itself from everybody else. Not that 40% on by Houston's low, but you can see where UConn's status as the favorite defending champion really kind of shows off here.
So New Mexico, a popular pick to the Sweet 16, and then you've got McNeese and NC State right behind them as popular picks to the Final Four.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny how you can see that in real time and flip between how far things people can go. There's a limit for some people, and then some fan bases are like, no, I'm going for it more. I'm going for it more. So McNeese's fans are the passionate ones here. At least the more passionate ones in numbers than the other ones. You see, New Mexico drops down to a little over 1% to make the Final Four. Not that that's bad for an 11 seed, but you can see the difference here with McNeese. It's a little noticeable on the 3% line.
All right, Stats. Well, anything else standing out to you or any other changes from yesterday before we move on to the women's side?
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious if these 6-11 games stay as our toughest deciders for people, or if maybe like an 8-9 kind of research itself as, in theory, you think to be the hardest one to pick at 8-9. So I'm curious to see if anything switches there, and maybe UNC fans see that their team's now only the third most popular team. Maybe they'll come to the rescue and pick the Tar Heels.